My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me now and we will explore these topics and so much more with fascinating guests, authors, and experts who will guide us to Destination Unlimited. Today, we have an opportunity to create a new future. As we move from the aftermath of a global crisis, we face the astounding task of needing to rebuild our world. But do we have to rebuild it in the strict sense of constructing it as it was, or can we form another world, a better one? The possibility exists, and it poses an unprecedented challenge. There are no historical precedents for consciously setting about building a new world with a new cultural paradigm. We must find our own way. For this endeavor, we need all the guidance we can get. My guest this week on Destination Unlimited, Professor Ervin László, says this may be achieved with the new paradigm of quantum consciousness. With his friend and co-author Frederick Sau, as well as thought leaders including Greg Braden, Gene Houston, and Bruce Lipton, he shares a unique view of the emerging quantum paradigm they believe will guide us in creating a better life for all beings who inhabit Earth. Ervin László is a Hungarian philosopher of science, a systems theorist, integral theorist, and originally a concert pianist who has published more than 100 books and 400 papers. Ervin László has a PhD from the Sorbonne and is the recipient of 4 honorary PhDs. His many awards and distinctions include nominations for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004 and 2005. His website is ervinlaszlobooks.com, and he joins me this week to share his 2 latest books, Dawn of an Era of Well-Being, New Paths to a Better World, and his amazing personal story, My Journey, A Life Quest of the Purpose of Life. Please join me in welcoming to Destination Unlimited Professor Ervin László. Welcome, Professor.
Well, wonderful to be here. Please call me Ervin.
I will do that, sir. Thank you very much. Ervin, my life has been blessed by many wonderful teachers. One of them shared that there was something missing from the biblical 10 commandments, that there should have been an 11th commandment, thou shalt have purpose. My sense is that you came into this life with that 11th commandment in your consciousness. One of your 2 new books is My Journey, A Life in the Quest of the Purpose of Life. Please share with our listeners your path and how your multifaceted purpose unfolded.
My goodness, that's a very large order. I'm trying to mention some facets of it. I've written that little book that I wrote, that I try to recount these main elements. Let me just be very short and briefer about it, and then we can dialogue and develop it. I was born into a musician family, and music lovers family, actually. And I was my talents for music and the piano was discovered by my mother when I was 5. By the time I was 7, I was playing concerts in my native city. By the time I was 9, I had my debut with the Symphony Orchestra of Hungary. And then I had an international career, which included a debut in New York, which was written up at the time by Life magazine and by Time and Newsweek and all the media. So that I came from music, but music wasn't my destination. Music was a stage, even though people would have said at the time, for the first 22 years of my life, nobody would have said that I'll do anything else in my life but be a concert pianist. But when I got a little bit older, in my 20s, I started recalling conversations that I had with my uncle, who was a philosopher. Even though I didn't understand much of it at the time, when we were walking and he was telling me about life and society and where we could be going and what the purpose of it may be. But the ideas, the questions stuck in my mind. So when I was old enough to start thinking of my own, I started visualizing, trying to think, what is it really that I'm here for? Am I here to justice, which is a wrong thing to say because it's an important thing, but am I here to give concerts, to give pleasure to people through music, through the piano? Or is there also something else for me, something else that I could be doing? And that's a one-way street, when you start asking these questions and you start looking into things, then you discover more and more things, and you discover more and more things that you don't know than compared to what you already do know. So that you go search further. I went into the search. I started thinking, started talking, started taking, attending classes at the universities, first in New York, then in Munich. And I started then writing. And one of my writings, a book which I published in 1963, it was my first book, caught the eye of the head of the philosophy department at Yale. He invited me to come to Yale. I spent a semester there as a visiting fellow. And from there on, it launched me in an academic career. I was the associate professor and full professor at the State University of New York. And I was in an academic world, wrote a lot, organized conferences, spoke a lot. And it turned out that I'm going to be a philosopher of science, and thinking as futurist, some people thought. And perhaps nothing else. So that was a kind of like another incarnation after the musician incarnation one. This was a kind of a reincarnation, perhaps, as a philosopher of science and society. One of my books caught the eye of the head of the Center of International Studies at Princeton, and I went to Princeton then at the Woodrow Wilson School, and those seminars were on modeling world order, how you can forecast, predict, or at least get an idea of what kind of futures are in store for us. And these modelings, these ideas, these books that came out of that caught the attention of the at the time of the Club of Rome was a major international think tank, and the head of that, and he asked me to write a report for the Club of Rome on the new limits. The first report was on the limits to growth, and that became an international bestseller. That I was asked to talk about the inner limits of growth and the purposes of human society. How can we harmonize those? That led me to United Nations, and in the United Nations I spent 7 years as director of research at the Institute for Training and Research in New York. And then again, and I won't go on longer than that, but when that completed, I didn't return to the ivory tower place of refuge of a campus. Rather than that, I went out and tried to put my ideas into action. I wrote books on how we can make use of science, the insights of science, and how we can combine them with spirituality, so that what we know is useful for us to forecast, at least to get a glimpse of what there is coming for us. And that is my activist phase, and that's the phase I'm still in. I write books, I give talks, and I try to get the idea across that here we are at a critical moment in history, but the sky is dark in spots, but there is also sunshine, and we can use the better path. We can go on a positive path. We are not condemned to a difficult chaos. We can create a new and thriving world, as I would now say. And that's where I'm now.
You had mentioned that you were a musical prodigy, playing the piano when you were 5 and performing with the Budapest Symphony Orchestra when you were 9. How did this natural ability manifest for you and shape your later understanding?
First of all, music made sense to me. It's like talking, like somebody tells you something which makes sense, which is the aha. That's the effect that music had on me. My mother, who was a piano teacher, piano professor, would start playing some pieces of music for me. I would pick it up. I never really learned to read a score of music, because I never had opportunity or occasion or need to look at the score. She played it for me. I could play it after her. And then I could even continue how it was, because a piece of music, a great music, cannot go on any other way but the way it does. And I had this intuition. I could pick it up, call it channeling. I don't know what it is. But music was talking to me, a piece of music was speaking to me. I picked it up and I wanted to show it to people how that is, share it with people. And that's what I did on concerts, on public performances. So it manifested itself as what people call talent. I don't know what you would actually call it, but it manifested for me as something very natural. I like to live in music, in the world of music.
And in retrospect, do you sense a connection based upon your work with consciousness and your ability?
Yes, the connection is there, which you mentioned already. The search for meaning, the search for purpose, and the search for understanding, that is there on music, and that is there in science. This is what I was looking for. You see, there's a sense of perfection when you listen to great music. When you play it, particularly if you play it together with other musicians, play it as chamber music, play it as soloist or as an orchestra, or play it with a violinist or a cellist. I mean, it's a marvelous feeling. And then when the public is there and the public responds, you can feel the public response. You can feel that there is something passing in common to us. And that something is something like perfection. It can't be any other way. And it's extremely meaningful. And I thought, if that is here in music, it must be there in other forms of art. It must be there in literature. It must be there in dance. It must be there also in philosophy. It must be reflected, surely, in the work of the great philosophers. And finally, I came across, I dared to ask this question and I dared to look into it. Maybe in the leading edge of science, the same perfection comes to light. Nowadays, I have a name for it. I not necessarily call it perfection, also that's what it is. I'll call it coherence. A great work of art gives you an experience of coherence. A great piece of music gives you coherence. A great insight, whether it comes from spirituality or from science, gives you a sense of coherence. Things just make sense, and things hang together. They make one whole, and you're part of that whole. That's, for me, is what truly coherence is.
To your point, I've been writing poetry since early childhood, and as an adult, I had a sense that the words were coming through me rather than from me.
That's exactly my sense. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I am convinced that truly great art is spontaneous, that it manifests itself through the person as a vehicle. You're not making it up. You don't do it. You don't just create it. We interpret it in the best sense of the word. I think what I'm writing, what I'm thinking is coming through me. I try to be a good transformer, a good transmitter. I don't really dare to say a good channel, because that sounds to be like too esoteric, but I'm something that is picking it up. I can pick it up. I can put it into meaningful, coherent works, which are expressed in word nowadays. I never really composed. I was an interpreter all the times in music. But in writing, in philosophy and in science, of course, I do the original work myself. I draw on the insights around me, what I can find. Whenever I see something to which I can feel, aha, that's the real thing. That's how it must be. Then I try to make sense of it and try to pull it together with other aha experiences. And that's the purpose. That's what I want to do when I write and when I talk.
There was a wonderful song, not classical music, but in the 1960s, performed by a group called the Moody Blues. The song was entitled With the Eyes of a Child, and the lyrics said in part, "With the eyes of a child, you must come out and see that your world's spinning round, and through life you must be a small part of a whole, of a love that exists with the eyes of a child, you will see. When we are children, do we have a different level, perhaps a purer level of consciousness?
What you just said is something what I'd like to say is a logo, is a motto for my latest works, really. This is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to remain a child. A child, I think, has this natural, instinctive understanding. I can now interpret it also in scientific terms, that we have something that we can perceive, which is on a superficial level is not evident. A child lives it, a child feels it, an artist feels it and lives it. A great scientist does the same thing, and a great spiritual person does the same thing. So I think truly what you're quoted there is the motto that I would like to give to what I produce, to what I grieve for. And I fully agree, yes, a child is built into this world. We are brainwashing him or her out of it when it comes into, particularly into school age and into adolescence. But it's a pity, because traditional people don't get out of it, they stay with it. And I think great creative people on all fields of endeavor stay with it. So to be able to stay with it is to become one with the world around you, have the coherence with the world. I think that is the purpose of life, perhaps. That is certainly the most immediate purpose, the individual purpose of the artist, of the creator.
If you had the ability to speak to childhood educators around the world simultaneously, what should they do to nurture this in children?
Tell them that to come forth and don't be afraid to live up to and to think out or to talk it or to act it out in some way, what you really feel. The great mistake is to say, shut up, don't be stupid, don't imagine things, go back to put your feet on the ground and just get back to reality. And that's really brainwashing children out of what they would originally have, this creative instinct, this creative impetus, which grasps the world at a deeper level than we do when we are having our feet, so to speak, on the ground. Yes, so just stay with it, you could say to the child. As the educators and the parents around you encourage your children. Children come up with fantastic insight. You know, the entire literature, the most striking literature perhaps, is when children come up with stories what appear to be their previous lives. Many thousands of these stories have been collected about so-called reincarnation researchers. But children, when they first start to vocalize, to verbalize, then they often come up with these stories, especially in cultures where they're not told, to stop, to shut up and not be stupid. And the East, particularly, the reincarnation is a known, edited fact of life, a fact of existence. Children often come up with these stories, and it's fantastic because many of them can be verified of having been the experiences of lived people who lived prior to the lifetime of the child. So this is just one example. But I think great works, whatever field, whether science or spirituality or society or philosophy, are born as a product of imagination. I'm not the only one who says that. Einstein said it himself. Einstein said, our imagination is our insight, or intuition, he actually said, our intuition is more important than our rationality. Our intuition is the base. Then if you're interested in music, you compose. If you're interested in philosophy, you try to put it into words. And if you're interested in science, you try to find ways in which this can be observed, proved, verified. And anyway, these are the follow-up endeavors. The genuine endeavor is always to allow this insight to come through you, to come manifest itself, and then to allow it to blossom. Then you can blossom, then you can strive.
Much of your work is dedicated to an understanding of consciousness. Is consciousness universal, and does everything have consciousness?
I would say more than that. Not only have consciousness, everything is consciousness. I would say consciousness is not just is universal, yes, but it's cosmic. It's not something that a brain enclosed in a cranium is producing when the neurons are moving in a particularly in phase. That was the old idea of consciousness. We're somehow producing it by a brain function. It now turns out that the consciousness that we have as a function of the brain is a transmission function, not a creation function. I'm not saying that everything we experience, we are conscious of, exists as such in space and time. But the intuition on which it's based, into the intuition that makes it gives sense, that gives you the aha experience, that is something that exists, that you just approach, you decode in a way. It's in us. And the latest insight, I'm fascinated with reading about the work of the Heart Math Institute, for example, but many other scientists, Lipton and Bruce Lipton and Deepak Chopra and others, are coming up with this notion that where we accept, where we receive the insights that are around us, where our consciousness is open, that immediate tuning fork effect. When we tune ourselves to that deeper reality, it's not immediately in the brain, but first of all, it's in the heart. And the heart is the first tuning fork as it were, which transmits the information to the brain. That I think is an emerging insight, very important, because if you think about it, the heart is one of the most mysterious and most foundational instrument, or I would say organ, that we have in the world. It starts beating in the embryo. What makes it beat? Why is all of a sudden an element of that group of cells start to fluctuate and start to beat? And how is that beat giving form to life, giving substance to what we call life? And why is it when that beat stops, that life itself stops? Of course, we can explain it in terms of oxygen flows and the resources cleaning the cells, but it's the heart that is the chief conductor. In French, it's the chef d'orchestre, the chief of the orchestra. I'm mentioning this because 2 days ago, I was in Paris. I had an occasion to give a talk to scientists about these new insights, and I was mentioning this, and to everybody was really intrigued with this idea that, yes, the heart may be the foundational element of our deep perception of the world, of our better understanding of what the world is, of what we are, of the coherence between ourselves and between our body, the group of cells that make up our body, and the world around us.
Interesting that earlier this year, a poem came through me entitled "The Brain Inside the Heart." So we're on the same wavelength there, sir. Absolutely.
Yeah, it is. The brain is the perceptive organ, the perception of verbalizer, articulating organ is inside the heart. Yes, I agree with that.
Absolutely. My guest, Professor Ervin László, we're talking about his new books, My Journey, A Life in Quest of the Purpose of Life, and we'll be discussing his other new book. It's called Dawn of an Era of Well-Being, New Paths to a Better World. Ervin, please tell our listeners where they can get your books and find out more about you.
Well, the best thing is, I wrote a lot of books. The best thing is not to just try to find an individual book. Look at the collection of my books, and there is a website for that. Just put my name written together, Ervin László, ervinlászlóbooks.com. And there you'll find information.
Wonderful. And we'll be back with more of Professor Ervin László after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
Free your mind with Om Times Radio, IOM FM. Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Om Times, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
back on Destination Unlimited. My guest this week, Professor Ervin László. We're talking about his new books, My Journey, A Life in the Quest of the Purpose of Life, and Dawn of an Era of Well-Being, New Paths to a Better World. Ervin, you've said that the universe is an evolving, complex, and coherent system, and that the cosmos as a whole and the sub-quantum domain are both reflections of this. In essence, as above, so below. Is humanity also a reflection of this?
We are, as humanity, we are above. I don't mean that we're better. I mean we are on the surface. But there is also a deeper layer, and we express the deeper layer. Plato said that already is the layer or the level of the soul, of the ideas, of the forms, which are eternal. In quantum physics, one can talk about the deep, unified field, which underlies all the surface phenomena, which David Bohm called the implicate order. We are the explicate order. We are on the surface. So yes, the whole universe, as we perceive it, is a reflection, is a manifestation of a deeper level. And to understand a deeper level is to understand what there is, what the world is, and not just how it appears. So yes, there is this deep level, which is us, truly us. And we find out that it's us and the world, because we are a part of that world. We are a reflection, a manifestation of that world. Is one manifestation is us, another manifestation is a quantum, still other one is a solar system or a galaxy. These are all parts of the informed explicate order. The information that creates it, that order, is underneath it, is on a deep level, the level of inspiration. We can accede to it by intuition, and we call it inspiration. But it's not just observation.
Earlier this year, your book, The Immutable Laws of the Akashic Field, Universal Truths for a Better Life and a Better World, was published. What is the Akashic Field, and how may our understanding of those laws lead us to oneness?
Well, the Akashic Field is the universe, is how we perceive the universe, is how the universe manifests itself to us. Another name for the Akashic Field is the zero-point field in physics, the universal quantum field also, the implicate order in David Bohm's quantum physics. It's really the deep dimension. And this manifests to us as a field, according, at least in the vocabulary and conceptual arsenal of science, where many things occur and they are somehow connected, then we perceive it and we claim that they are manifestations of a field that connects them. We can't perceive, we can't agree or conceive of any of two things that are totally disconnected. If they are separate points of space and time, they must still be connected, and they're connected through a field. And that field, which has certain laws that manifest the field, then we can call it, and we can call it by the name that has been given to it thousands of years ago, first by the Hindu seers in India. We call it the Akasha domain or the Akasha dimension. And if you now talk about science, then we can talk about the domain or dimension as constituting a field. You can call it the Akashic Field. And then it relates it right away to the Akashic memory field and the Akashic Chronicles, all of these things which are handed down in the tradition because they are phenomena that crop up again and again and again. And we conceive them in different ways. But fundamentally, they are the universal field which we can, and I, for my part, I call it the Akashic Field. Many people that can relate to that. It's easier to talk about the Akashic Field than about the quantum zero-point field, for example. So it's reality. The Akashic Field is reality, but not the deep reality. It's not the surface reality, it's the deep reality.
And you say immutable laws. Please give us a couple of examples.
I really talk about three such laws, so you can find a lot more. One is that everything is connected. Connected through something, connected not just standing in the air, but connected through resonance, through vibrations, and that occur somehow in a field. So the connection, the universal connection of things is one of the eternal laws of the Akashic Field. What happens here is not limited to here, it also happens there. This we know from the quantum experiments, for example. But we also knew it intuitively. And what happens at any point in time influences, and it's also present in all successive points. So this universal interconnection in space and time is perhaps the most fundamental of the laws of the Akashic Field.
And so you're basically relating that on a science level to what they call quantum entanglement.
Yes. Non-locality or entanglement, these are all names that can give in physics to the fact that things are not separate. Einstein said it very clearly. Separation is an illusion. Things are all joined together by some means, and we can think of it as a field. The field itself is not perceptible per se. You can think of the field as being a fishing net, for example, which was made up of threads so fine that you don't see the threads. You don't see the net itself. But when you insert it in water and there are fish around, you can catch the fish, you can influence what goes in the water. The to us invisible net actually has a visible effect. And that's how it is. The invisible quantum field has visible effects.
Your other new book coming out this month is Dawn of an Era of Well-Being, New Paths to a Better World. What inspired that book?
The absolute urgency of finding alternative ways to the way we have been. We have to find sustainable ways. We have to become a humane, equitable, and sustainable civilization. Otherwise, in this interdependent planet, which is so closely linked now through the internet, through information flows of so many kinds, this will just create inequality and will create breakdowns. The exploitation of resources, the heating up of the atmosphere, the dozens and dozens of specific processes that are going on. If you don't handle them, don't manage them, try to equilibrate them, balance them out, then they will create problems such that it will become very difficult to move back from. Tipping points, so-called tipping points, or points of no return, are known. Now we are at the point where there is a global tipping point on the horizon. We have to act on that so that it doesn't tip us into a negative future, after which there would be, by definition, then we can't come back. But I think we are not there yet. We are approaching a tipping point, but we still can work with what we have got. We can still create a better world by recognizing a deeper underneath it all. There is a very coherent, harmonious, unified, integral world coming, evolving, and coming to light. Yes, we are not taking account of it. We are hiding it, as it were, and we are looking at the surface manifestations of the conflicts and the stress and the strain. But we have to got back deeper down. And the key to it is in us, in our heart, as we said, also in our deep spirit, and the ability to communicate and to perceive, to receive more than we actually can give.
Please tell us about your co-author, Frederick Tsao, and his contribution to the book.
Frederick, or Fred as we call him, was born into a Shanghai trading company family a family-owned enterprise, which he then developed into a multinational conglomerate. And a very bright individual, but he felt that he is being guided in some way. He's not doing it just by his own inputs, by his own creativity, but there is something guiding him. And this is not just meant to be a successful business enterprise. It's meant for him to be someone who can contribute to peace and well-being in the world. He takes his inspiration from the Tao, from the Oriental ways of thinking, the great Buddhist ways of thinking, where the Tao is what I call evolution in terms of Western science. The Tao is what creates from one to two, as from two to many, and from many to all. But the Tao is still there. So he describes this from the old Taoist Buddhist writings, and he applies it in his business enterprise, and he tries to express it now so that other people can also participate in it and can make use of it. So I'm very pleased to have had this contact with Fred. He picked up my writings at some over 15 years ago or so. All of a sudden he showed up on my doorstep here where I live in Tuscany. It was a one winter day, and he just said, I read what you wrote, I'd like to talk with you. He sat down and talked for a week. And since then, we have developed a partnership where we are doing his research institute in Shanghai, my research institute in Italy, in Tuscany. We are working together, among other things, to produce books, to produce podcasts, and symposia.
Wonderful. How may science move from the long-established materialist view to a new view embracing consciousness?
Very difficult. It was very difficult, I would say, because the more successful you are in a field, the less willing, I'm talking about the averages, the less willing you are to change. One sort of gives up something that is successful. It's very difficult. To give up something where it doesn't really work out, and you're looking for something, you're eager to find something else, it's easier. To be a leading scientist and to say what I have learned, what made me a leading scientist is not the final word. Now there's something new coming. That is a tremendous feat. A truly great scientist remains open. An example of that is Max Planck, who gave a talk in Florence not too long before he died. And in his talk, he said, I look back at my 40 years of pursuing what seems to be the most concrete science that you can imagine, the physics of matter. He says, when I look back on that now, there is something I can tell you. There is no matter as such. I think Newton would say that himself, because Newton was a great spiritual master at the same time. Only he didn't publish his books. He published, and he became known for his laws, which are the surface manifestation. But Newton also went way below that. Max Planck went below that. I think the great scientists, whether it was Heisenberg or Pauli or Bohr or any others, and Jung, of course, all these are deeply spiritual persons themselves. So how do you do this? You go back to yourself. You get the depths, the strengths to change by your own power that is vested in you, by the own power of recognition of what the world is like, what it is truly, and what we are truly as part of that world.
May that also include a new paradigm moving from competition to conscious cooperation?
Well, if that new way of insightful thinking is really one of coherence, then you don't abolish competition. Competition can be a spirited competition. You abolish cutthroat competition, life and death competition. You abolish competition that destroys the framework within which you compete. competition like the old Greek idea of the Olympics, when young people come together and they match themselves, so how skillful they are, how much strength they can have, but they match themselves for the common good within the idea that we are all Greek people at that time, more high-level spiritual individuals. And so the framework always remains the same. But we can have competition, spirited competition for common goods, of course, but not breaking apart the system, not to disrupt. I think a true insightful businessman recognizes that his business is not there to outcompete others, not there to break the link, to be a disruption. He is there to contribute to the flowering of a branch of human activity, which is his business. So I think it's a very different enterprise, very different ambition than the current one.
And we'll be back with more of Professor Ervin László after these words on the Om Times Radio Network.
Humanity Healing International is a small nonprofit with a big dream. Since 2007, HHI has been working tirelessly to bring help to communities with little or no hope. Our projects are not broad mandates, nor are they overnight solutions, but they bring the reassurance that no one is alone and that someone cares. To learn more, please visit humanityhealing.org. Humanity Healing is where your heart is.
Imagine yourself being transported to India, to the banks of the Ganga and an ashram in Rishikesh. Visualize that you are welcome to satsang with an American sannyasi who shares the wisdom of her guru. Your visualization has manifested. Join Sattvi Bhagawati Saraswati for inspiration and transformation every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on Om Times Radio. Back on Destination Unlimited, my guest this week is Professor Ervin László. What are the shifts that you see that we need to achieve this new world?
Shift, as they say, from I to we. Shift from competition to understanding. And the shift from separation to integration, among other things. And these are all shifts. And they all go in the same direction, go to the direction of oneness, of belonging, of unity. And ultimately, that's a word that can be used now more and more because it really stands for something very real and essential. And the word, the most famous four-letter word in the English language, which is love. I think the shift has to be toward this unconditional and universal sense of belonging to others, treasuring others, feeling oneself one with others, which is then the expression of genuine love.
The Beatles sang, "Love is all you need." Is there a science to love?
Well, it's a science to show the foundations that love is the manifestation of something which is real, which is good, because it's nature, it's evolution. When you're a mature individual, then you can describe that maturity in terms of love. But the maturity itself can be described in terms of coherence, in terms of the frequencies which are in phase and which have compatible amplitudes, for example. And they create extending waves which are unified and united and integral. We can describe it in mathematical terms and physics terms, but the manifestation of it, the felt manifestation, how does it feel to be truly evolved? It feels like loving all things and being one with all things.
Absolutely. You quote Einstein in your book where he said, "No problem can be solved at the level of consciousness that created it." How may we each reconnect to source and the natural patterns of cosmic consciousness?
That's a great challenge of our time, basically. We are going to change our ways of acting when we change our ways of thinking. We're going to change our ways of thinking when we change our consciousness, our recognition, our spontaneous recognition that we are not separate little atomic points, atom points, little points separating from one another, just moving about in an impersonal, cold universe. The universe itself, that to me is a very meaningful insight. The universe itself is very meaningful. It's very purposeful. It's oriented. Its orientation we call evolution. It has started 13.8 billion years ago in the wake of the Big Bang. Started with a total chaos out of which emerged little points which then became to integrate, not haphazardly, in very, very clearly following laws. Among them, there is this famous law in physics, the Pauli exclusion principle, named after Wolfgang Pauli, whereby it shows that electrons cannot join, just coming to integrate with the existing atomic nucleus. They only can enter into specific points at the electron shells that surround the nucleus. So that the upshot is to create an entity which we call an atom, which is capable of forming molecules, and the molecules capable of forming cells and crystals and living organisms and the whole ecologies of organisms and galaxies as well. And these laws were there at the Big Bang, and they created systems, not heaps or agglomerates, not just one thing after another. It used to be thought, even not long, 50 years ago, philosophers used to say, well, everything is random. Random processes producing the world. It turns out that you can't produce random processes, that highly coherent world, that underneath the surface conflicts, which underneath it all is there. You can't, there's not enough time. The time since the Big Bang wouldn't have been enough to produce even the DNA of a fruit fly. This is one of the computations. We need much more than random interactions. And that this universe is an oriented, directional universe, which we call an evolving universe, evolving toward higher levels of integration. And being part of that is the most fabulous way of being good for us, good for others, recognizing the highest level of achievement that a human being can do is to become part of the world, a true part, a motivating part, a genuine part. That is the greatest accomplishment we can aim for.
I recently interviewed feminine activist Gloria Felt, who said that women will lead the change we need to create a better world. Do you also see this?
I would say the feminine principle has to lead the way. Men also have the feminine principle, have some part. Women, of course, have normally much more effectively mastering that principle and acting along it. So in that sense, women have a better chance of leading the transformation to a better world. But what we need is the recognition that we need to create community. We can create oneness in this world. At the time of going out and conquering and mastering is past. That is not the next step. We have conquered all the livable areas on this planet. We can have access to all the resources that we can possibly use. And we increase that access, but it's not going to change things. What we need now is to use what we have got so that we create wholeness and love and integration, oneness in this world. That is a truly feminine principle, a family making principle, a community building principle. In that sense, I agree. Women are likely to be the most in the forefront of creating a new world, but men can participate in it just as well, because we all have both the feminine principle, the animus and the anima, as Jung called it. We all have it, whether we are men or women. Question is, how do we use it? What do we unearth? What do we translate into action?
Please tell us about the László Institute.
but it's dedicated to seeking a new paradigm, which is a paradigm of coherence. I thought there's a need someplace where we can put up a flag, as the Japanese tourists, when they're visiting a site, they have somebody leading with a flag. We need to put up some kind of a sign, say, over here, if you're interested in looking into what a new paradigm would look like, a new paradigm which allows this humanity to thrive, to live, to evolve, then come join us. Read at least, take cognizance of what we are doing. If you like, join. We are open. We have research program. My younger son, Alexander László, is the head of the research program. He welcomes people who come in and they say they want to look seriously into the nature of a new paradigm and how to apply it. Or perhaps they say we already found that and we want to know how we can join with others to develop it and to make use of it. We are also running symposia. We had the last symposium was on the new paradigm in politics a few months ago. We're going to the next one on a very vast subject of cosmology. What is the nature of the universe? What can we learn from that? And then in March, we'll have a symposium on the new consciousness, rather the new concept or the new paradigm of consciousness. So in all these ways that we try to further promote the inquiry into the idea of a paradigm which is a systematic, coherent body of thought to map the reality that is around us, the reality that is in us. So as I said, it's an open institute. You can look it up on laszloinstitute.com. And if you wish to follow it up, get in touch with me, get in touch with my executive director, Georgi Zavo, or my younger son, Alexander László, or my wonderful publicist, Nora Chisar. It's all there, all the information that you need to come together with us. It's all there.
I understand that you live in a 400-year-old former chapel in the hills of Tuscany. Do you have a sense of having lived there in a previous life?
Something said something to me. I don't know what. As I passed in 1973, I believe, and a Christmas holiday with my family, we passed underneath this hill where there was a kind of an old ruin. And I wanted to look at it. We were just about to go back. I was teaching the US at the time. And we had to, after the Christmas holiday was going to be up shortly, we had to fly back. But I still wanted to take a moment before we went back to Switzerland from where we originated on that trip. So let's go up and have a look. And we went up and it turned out to be an old house, which was pretty well of a ruin, except the walls and the much of the ceiling was still there. And these are vaults, beautiful arches, actually self-supporting arches, as it turned out. And it was top of a hill. And it was, I say, but it is, because this is where I'm living. And I said, something tells me that I ought to be living. I should be living here. I'd like to live here. We went up to the village, 1 mile away, on the next hill. And I asked around in the cafe, who owns this house, and how can I talk to him? And they pointed to a man sipping there his wine in a corner. He said, he is the one. So I went over to him. I said, I'm interested in the house. Would you sell it? This was the spur of the moment. He says, why do you want to buy it? Nobody ever wanted it so far. The hunters sometimes spend the night over there. It's a ruin. I said, never mind, I want it. He said, how much? And he named a figure which was ridiculously low. I said, fine, I'll buy it. I stayed there overnight. I'm in the village overnight. Next morning, I said, we go to the notary public who can make this into an act of purchase. And he named a figure which was twice as much as the one before, because he's so smart at the same time. It was still ridiculously low. So I said, fine. And we signed up. I entrusted a builder to come and make it livable. And we went back to New York. Came back in the summer and lived the first summer. And since then, lived there more and more until I left the UN. I didn't go back to my university. I went closer to nature. And I had this house, I had this already reconditioned chapel, and I went there to live. And since then, this is where I spend most of my time.
Wonderful. My guest, Professor Ervin László, his books, My Journey, A Life in Quest of the Purpose of Life, and also Dawn of an Era of Well-Being, New Paths to a Better World. One more time, please tell our listeners where they can get your books.
Well, look at these books that you just heard about. Another book that was published a couple of days ago, the 28th of September, was called The Wisdom Principles. And that is also available. So look at the website, ervinlaszlobooks.com. You can look at László Institute. They also will lead you there. I hope you have a look at some of them, and I'll be happy always to discuss with interested readers. What does it all mean, and how that we can get to a better understanding of what it all means.
Ervin, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your path, your wisdom, and your truth. Thank you, sir.
Victor, it was my pleasure, absolutely, to talk with somebody who is so genuine, so sincere, so much on the same wavelengths as I am. It's a great delight. Thanks very much.
And thank you again. And thank you for joining us on Destination Unlimited. I'm Victor, the Voice Furman. Have a wonderful week.